כן.
אנחנו ניפגש מחר בבוקר אחרי שאני מת עם החיסולה.
בסדר, אני רק עכשיו התחלתי זום, I'm doing a piracy thing.
כן, כן, מה קורה עם זה?
בסדר, עכשיו אני הולך לדבר עם סטודנט, איזה 100 ומשהו סטודנטים ב-NYU.
לא, חשוב מה קורה עם...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this NYU LA webinar in conjunction with CreativeFuture. For those of you who do not know me, I am Nina Sadowsky. I'm the program director of NYU LA. I have a particular vested interest in the conversation today because while I earn part of my living and do part of my work as an educator, I also am a creator. I'm a television writer and a novelist. We'll talk a little bit more about that later and how the discussion that we're going to have today really shows how things can be adversely affected if we do not protect our copyright. But we're going to talk to some very distinguished people from the industry today. I'm going to begin with Ruth Vitale. Ruth, would you like to come on out and reveal yourself? Ruth and I know each other for quite a long time. We are old friends. We met when she was an acquisitions and production executive, primarily acquisitions, I guess, is what you've done. So Ruth, would you give us a little background about yourself and what you're doing now?
Right. First of all, thank you for doing this. There are, so few people that really do understand how important this issue is. And so because we've been together and through the wars together, you do understand it. I come from 30 years in the film business, guys. I started at a little company called Vestron after I was at the movie channel. And at Vestron, we made a little movie called Dirty Dancing, which sort of changed the world of independent film at the time. I then went on to work at United Artists. I worked at New Line as head of acquisitions and co-productions. I ran Fine Line, the art house division of New Line, where we did probably the most famous movie is we acquired Shine, the Jeffrey Rush movie. And then I formed and founded Paramount Classics, which was the art house division of Paramount. And my partner, David Dinnerstein, and I ran that for 8 years, where we released 80 films, 50 films, I think. Hustle and Flow, Mad Hot Ballroom, You Can Count on Me, The Machinist, you name it. And we were there for 8 years. And then I went to First Look Features, where I was head of the domestic arm of the company. And I was there for a couple of years. And then I went into the independent space, raised money, and did independent distribution of films. However, in 2013, I was approached to see if I would be interested in running this organization, CreativeFuture. It was an advocacy organization to advocate for stronger copyright protections for people in film and television and music and photography and book publishing. And I did what other people said was, is piracy really a problem? Because if you don't live it, which you're going to hear about today from our other guests, you don't really understand it. And I got quite an education in 2013. I decided to take it on, and I have been doing this I'm on year 8. And the reason I love it is because we're 150% in the right. No one should be able to steal your work. No one should be able to steal the fruit of your labor. So we're going to talk about that today.
Okay, so next I'd like to introduce Jonathan Younger. Jonathan, I feel like I'm on Hollywood Squares here, but Jonathan, would you reveal yourself? So Jonathan is the co-president of Millenium Media and a producer and executive. And why don't you describe your path to the film business and what your company does?
Sure. Well, my path in the film business, I always, I only wanted the film business since I was a kid. I started my career as an actor, doing theater at a very young age, and moved to LA for that dream. And then I started working for a producer about 10 years ago. And that was at Millenium. I was an assistant and then rose through the ranks, and today run the company with my partner, Jeffrey Greenstein. And Millenium, we're one of the largest independent production companies. And we're responsible for movies like The Expendables, most recently The Outpost, which I'm also an actor in, so I didn't forget my roots. And, you know, The Angel Has Fallen, London Has Fallen, The Hitman's Bodyguard, The Mechanic, and amongst many others. And my main, with regards to piracy, what really got me so involved in heavily advocating to protect copyright was when our movie Expendables 3 was hacked, stolen about a month before the release, and by opening day there were 60 million illegal downloads, and us and our distributors lost about $250 million in revenue, and we had some companies go out of business, some independent distributors go out of business in different countries. And it was very sad, and that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of learning about piracy. And then I started to learn about how much of a problem it is and how much worse it gets every single year, and how it really affects the independent film business. It's actually staggering. So, and that's how I'm here today.
All right, we will get into a little bit more about that later. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Kerry Muzzey, who is a composer and is coming at this question from the musical perspective. So Kerry, could you give a little background both on your career and then what took you to realize that you wanted to get involved with CreativeFuture?
Yeah, absolutely. I was originally from a small town in Illinois, and I've been writing music since I was a little kid. I ended up going to college for a music degree. And after college, when I was 22, I said, I'm moving to New York City. And that's what I did. But while I was trying to aspire to the composer thing, I was also working in the business side of music. A couple years in music publishing, doing sync licensing. I remember being 24. It was my first job at EMI Music in New York. I got thrown into the deep end, and I was administering the Beatles catalog for TV, being brand new to the music publishing world. Trial by fire, but it was a hell of an education. And then after that, moved over to MTV Networks, where I was on the other side of things, doing rights and clearances for VH1, for the series like I Love the 80s, I Love the 70s, before they were rock stars, all that kind of stuff. And it took a while to build up the composer resume and the composer work to the point where I could actually leave the day job and do that. But I made the full-time leap away from that in 2009 because I had enough going on that I could make it work. I'd say the biggest contributor to my being able to do that was my getting myself onto iTunes in about 2006. It was the early days of iTunes. It's when there weren't a whole lot of independents in the mix there yet. But the amazing thing was, once you took away the gatekeeper of a record label or an agent, suddenly your work was on these virtual shelves next to other film composers. And it was through being on iTunes that I started to get calls from producers and editors, or, you know, an ad agency wants to use this music in their new spot. We love your stuff. Would you score this short for us, as kind of an introduction? And then in 2009, I got two really good placements. One was as a recurring love theme on GLEE, and the other was a couple placements on So You Think You Could Dance. And it was searching for my name on YouTube to see if anybody had done anything with those that led me to Content ID, which took a while to get, but eventually I got it, and I was able to. Can you
explain what Content ID is? Because I don't think that most
people
sure. know. Yeah.
Yeah. In short, Content ID is digital fingerprinting. It's YouTube's own digital fingerprinting system for music, footage, photography, for everything, but especially for music. And basically you upload your music, it creates a digital fingerprint, and then it scans YouTube to find instances of your music.
And it's also for movies, because Jonathan has a version of Content ID, which is Content Verification Program, but we can get into that, but go ahead, Kerr.
Yeah, but that's what it is. And you know, I'm really glad that I had the music business background behind me, because I was able to deal with a lot of these. Basically, it was an avalanche of piracy and unlicensed use that I had no idea was there. It was essentially.
Can you give us some of the numbers? Because I saw them and they were pretty staggering.
Yeah, I was floored. By searching my name on YouTube, I had found maybe 20 or 30 videos, and they were GLEE fan mashups. Like it was cute. I got Content ID. I remember the morning that I opened the dashboard and I was like, I'm gonna find those 20 videos because this technology is really cool. And what I found was in the first hour, it found 200 videos. 8 hours later, it was up to 1,000 videos. By the next morning, it was up to 2,000. By the end of the first week, Content ID had found 10,000 videos. And by the end of the first month, Content ID had found 20,000 videos that had my music in them. So now 7 years later,
Unauthorized, unlicensed, and you're not
Completely.
paid for any of those, right?
right, completely. And now 7 years later, I'm up to about 120,000 videos that have my music in them as underscore.
Can we back up just a second, because what we're doing is getting granular without like looking at the whole picture. If anybody in this audience, and I hate not being able to see everybody, this whole COVID thing, it's like so annoying. Like you want to like talk to these people.
Yeah.
Hi guys, whoever's out there. So let's go back one step. The core copyright industries, okay, which are film, television, music, book publishing, journalism, software, and gaming, are a $1.3 trillion annual business for this country. Okay, so all those artists, and like I grew up saying, artists starve, don't, okay, we create a very robust American economy. Of the $1.3 trillion that we generate, we also employ 5.7 million Americans. Of those 5.7, I think about 2.2 plus million are from film and TV, and 1.9 are from music. So that's the bulk of that 5.7. And we're 6.8% of the gross domestic product, GDP. We're larger than agriculture, aeronautics, and pharmaceuticals. And those, when people come to DC with us, which Jonathan has come, Kerry has testified for us after COVID, so we didn't go. Those are the numbers that we leave with members of Congress to say, please don't say we don't matter, because we do. We are a huge cultural export, and we're a huge economic driver for this country. So keep that in mind. The Chamber of Commerce did a study last year. Last year? Maybe it's this year. I can't even, no, last summer. Digital piracy costs our economy a minimum of $29 billion a year, and probably as much as 70 billion. And somewhere between 250,000 and 560,000 jobs. So that goes back to the title of this seminar, which is the job you save may be your own. People think that pirating doesn't matter. I'm just one person, but it's not. You heard Kerry's numbers. You heard Jonathan's numbers. I'll give you one number and then I'll shut up and they can talk about their stuff. But this is like, I just want to set it up. Everybody knows Moonlight, the movie that almost didn't win the Oscar. It did $65 million at the box office worldwide during its theatrical run. An average ticket is $7. Okay, average ticket price around the world. So that's 9 million and change people bought tickets to see it. During its theatrical run, see if I could see you, I would ask you, what do you think the piracy transactions were? They were 60 million, 6-0. So 9 million people bought the movie and 60 million stole it. Now Google and YouTube, who are our enemies, say to us, have said personally at a testimonies, well, those people, those 60 million people are free publicity for you. You know, without those people, no one would have known about the movie. Well, we all know that's bullshit. And in normal times, we would say we won't dignify them with a response. But the fact is that you have to educate people. And the education is thus, okay, let's say 60 million people, most of them would never do anything but pirate it. And by the way, 12 million of those 60 million transactions were the day after the Oscars, right? Because people were curious. So let's say that 95% of those people wouldn't buy that movie ever. And it was just 5%. 5% of 60 million is 3 million. And let's say that they didn't even buy a movie ticket, just that they would stream it. That's $3.99 at a conservative stream. That's $12 million that would have gone back to Barry Jenkins and his team. Now, we happen to know the Barry Jenkins people, and we know Maggie Phillips is the music supervisor. They worked for 8 years on that movie. They didn't make any money while they were making it, and everyone deferred. And I'm pretty sure you guys all know what deferrals are. And those deferrals came to a lot of nothing. It's no surprise to me that Barry Jenkins now has a deal at Amazon, Nina, where he doesn't worry about back end, they just pay front end. Because now he doesn't have to worry about that.
Right. And if you think about it from a very practical perspective, you know, when any industry, so I'll talk about book publishing for a second. So $300 million are estimated loss to piracy in the book publishing business every year. So what is the practical effect? So the practical effect is less big advances for authors, buying less authors, spending less on marketing, right? It only hurts the artist. Ultimately, it hurts the artist because the corporation, the purveyor of the content, will adjust to make less and spend less to keep its margins, right? So every download, every piece of stolen property affects our ability to make new work. Jonathan, do you want to jump in a little bit and talk about it from the your perspective?
Well, what's crazy, what happens is I think that most of the people that think of piracy, especially in the movie business, is because people view Hollywood as like this red carpet, you know, everyone's a millionaire, everyone's rich industry. And the way it trickles down is, from what I understand, we're speaking to people who are going to be lawyers.
No. We have a very mixed group of students and alumni on this.
Oh, that want to be in the entertainment. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, it trickles down to the team, also of the artist, of who it is, and there are the revenues, the residuals that we normally get, becomes less and less because of piracy, especially in today's world where everything is streaming. I mean, digital is, our movie The Outpost, for example, came out only on digital. It didn't really hit theaters. There was no theaters because of COVID, and that's where it's living. And The Outpost, I think, has already been pirated, I don't know, almost a million, there's been almost a million, streams, climbing. But it trickles down to the team. So the lawyer, whoever works at the production company, whoever works for the actor, whoever works for whoever, all of that trickles down, and then the budget for the next movie becomes less. Because in the independent model, the way it works is when we want to make a movie, we work in something called the pre-sale system. So when we package a film, we go out to all the independent distributors around the world, so different territories like Germany, Italy, France, Spain, United States, Canada, the Caribbean, Asia, and we go to them and say, will you give us a minimum guarantee? So you go to a country like Germany, say, give us a minimum guarantee against what you think the movie is going to perform. I can't tell you how many of our movies' budgets have dropped down because of piracy, because they just can't make the revenues to justify buying a sequel of greater value, which is normally what you're supposed to do with a sequel. So budgets, even in the Has Fallen movies, for example, where it seemed like because of box office, it was really high. And a lot of countries around the world, they were suffering because the movie was stolen. It was pirated. It gets pirated once it goes into theaters. People go, believe it or not, camcorders are still a big thing today. Now they have the 4K cameras, which is crazy. But since the revenues go down, then it's hard to do the budgets. And it's hard for us to do things like shoot in the United States. Now we've had to go, now we go to Eastern Europe to shoot. So that's jobs in the United States that have been highly affected, you know, and I mean, I know crew, because I spend my time on set personally. I know crew in different states that we're used to doing, because we do 6 to 8 movies a year. You know, we're used to doing all of our movies, like boom mock operators that are maybe doing 1 movie a year now. And those are blue collar jobs. Those aren't jobs where someone's getting paid $1 million to do the movie. They're regular jobs.
So the average income in the film and television business, and Kerry, you may know this on the music side, is actually a little bit higher than the national average. Actually, a lot higher. I think it's close to $90,000. So they're skilled labor, okay? And so we should be promoting those jobs. And 85% of all businesses in film and television employ less than 10 people. So we think of the conglomerates, we think of Disney and Comcast and Netflix and, you know, whoever, but actually they're employing all these small businesses. Like Kerry's a small business, right, Kerry?
And we can't, I just wanted to say, you guys want jobs in the entertainment business, and there's less and less every single year. And this is a big reason why. So good luck. That's all I'm going to say is good luck to you all, because to break into this business right now is so hard. And like my company's at a hiring freeze, you know, because of, it has a lot to do with piracy. And there's people that have been coming and applying, people that want to help and want to give them jobs. And Hollywood is all about who you know. But it's very, very difficult. And we need to be able to raise the budgets again so that there are more jobs. And it's
so when Kerry will know this. So Napster, Kerry.
Oh yeah.
You know, everyone said, who was arguing against piracy at the time, there won't be any music. And no one believed that, right? No one believed that like music would go away. But the fact is that with piracy, it's harder to make a living as a musician.
Yeah. The thing I think also that people don't realize, because I was working at MTV Networks at VH1 during the whole Napster thing. And part of my job was liaising with the people at the labels and publicity people. And people think that when Napster hit and labels lost all this money, that like, oh, okay, so Mariah Carey's only gonna get a $28 million deal this year instead of a $30 million deal. That's not actually how it happened. Where those budget cuts were seen were administrative assistants lost their jobs, paralegals lost their jobs, graphic design departments at the labels that made the CD covers were obliterated, and graphic design then became an outsourced thing. The jobs, the impact was on the people who could least afford that impact. But unfortunately, when you can say those big bad record labels make so much money anyway, just like those big movie studios are so terrible, they're charging us for their movies. It's completely missing the human element and the human toll of what that is. But in that meta discussion of like, the music industry's dead, or conversely, streaming has resurrected the music industry. It hasn't. Spoiler. The
music industry went from what was it, like $36 billion to like $10 billion?
I don't know. I know that it came back
almost 2/3.
It came back enough, but again, these figures like the studios or the labels, the casualty to the budget cuts is always the middle class, the same way that the casualty in the streaming wars is the middle class or small or independent artist, because somebody doesn't want to drop $7.99 to buy your album when they can listen to it for free. And Jonathan's numbers are staggering. To hear like what kind of effect that's having on distribution for a major film where you're dealing with huge budgets. But I hate saying the word to scale, because to me it sounds like such a tech thing. But if you scale down that to the impact on an individual who makes their living, let's say as like a music library composer, or scoring cable TV shows, if that kind of thing still exists. The scale is equally as impactful. There was a very brief period when iTunes launched pre-Spotify where it had the effect of creating a new musical middle class, because independent artists had been able to bypass the distribution gatekeeper that was the major labels. I'd released a score for a film, short that I did for Jessica Biel's film company, Iron Ocean, back in like 2007. And iTunes put it on the front of the soundtrack page, sandwiched in between like the Elizabeth II soundtrack and a Thomas Newman score. And I remember opening iTunes and like kind of doing this, because like, am I on crack? Like, how is my album in the middle? But it was the perfect microcosm of what that did, because people could instantly find an audience. And if somebody bought your $9.99 album, you got $7 for that. So if you had 100 people buy your $9.99 album, that's $700. To scale, that's a huge amount of money to an independent artist, just like, you know, $100 million is to a movie studio.
But also what we've seen happen is, so musicians are making less money and have to tour, and if you're not famous, you can't tour because that's not going to pay.
And no one can tour now.
Right, and no one can tour now. The business has been decimated. And in the film business, what you've seen disappear are movies that I don't know that this audience will even know. I call them the George Clooney movies, the Up in the Air, Michael Clayton, you know, those thoughtful dramas that people who are looking for something of substance, because by the way, I'm the first one to go watch movies where shit blows up, because I acquired art films for so long that after I was done acquiring art films, I'm like, can I go to Yanni's movies? I want to go to Jonathan's movies. I want to see everybody like blow up. But what you do find is you get small indies and big tentpoles, and it's almost like the whole middle class of movies is disappearing.
Well, we just had a movie right now, our movie Blackbird. This is a perfect example. Our movie Blackbird just came out. It's a small independent film. It talks about euthanasia. It's got a great cast, it's a beautiful film.
And it's Roger Michell, Nina, okay? A brilliant British director.
He directed Notting Hill. We made the movie. It's not normally, I always go and say there's not one gun in the movie because it's a Millennium movie and there's not one gun, I promise. The only gun in there is Kate Winslet's stellar performance. Fired. So but what happened is the movie came out. Other distributors had to push because of COVID, because in a lot of territories they still need theatrical, or they try to do video, but they have to push because of COVID. The movie had to come out here. Now it's heavily pirated, and I've already had buyers and distributors saying, I can't pay you I can't take delivery of the movie anymore. I can't release it. It's in my territory. So that's a big problem. Look, for me, the bottom line is, it's pretty black and white and simple. If it doesn't belong to you, don't steal it. It's very simple. There is no difference between stealing something digital in 2020 than walking into a Best Buy and taking a DVD off a shelf. In a digital world, there's no difference between a physical good and a digital good. It doesn't belong to you. If you want to watch it, or you want to listen to it, you have to pay for it. Or else you're not going to get more of it, because that's what's so messed up about the public. And you have, you know, Silicon Valley creating these smoke screens saying that we're trying to destroy creativity or try to destroy innovation or trying, you know, all that bullshit. And the truth is no. And we're trying to censor the internet, like all this crazy stuff. Like, no, we don't want censorship. We're totally against censorship. I just made a movie about euthanasia to try to start a conversation, you know. We don't, and we want people to innovate and to create, and we want there to be room in this business for everyone to innovate and create.
Right. I think one of the things that they probably won't understand is, so Google is sort of omnipresent and everyone uses it. It's Google search. If you have an Android phone, it pings you 360 times a day, even if you turn it off, just so you know. So I'm an iPhone girl because Tim Cook really values your privacy. But Google and Facebook are responsible for facilitating piracy. And related to that, I believe they're responsible for lowering the value of what we do, because they absolutely offer it up free. So if you go to Google search or you go to Facebook and you see it on, you see it somewhere, on one of their pages, because they have movie pages that are all illegal, you understand, oh, it's free. Why should I have to pay for it? So they have aided and abetted and facilitated the devaluing of our product, both in film, television, music, books, art, photography, you name it.
Ruth, could you talk a little bit about, because I remember this from one of our earlier conversations, about the other business that the people in the piracy businesses are in? Because I think this really also is a very, very important context.
So these are criminal enterprises, and Jonathan has come across these. So piracy is a vertical of a large criminal enterprise that can be gun running, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, child labor, and piracy funds a lot of this because it's cheap. They have to have a server, and that's it. Go ahead.
I have two personal. One of the things that I do is I actually fight piracy behind the scenes. So, I work with all sorts of interesting characters, to say the least. Sometimes you got to fight fire with fire. But I'll tell you two things. One is we had our movie Mechanic Resurrection starring Jason Statham. That was pre-leaked. Also that was about 2 weeks before it was released. We were able to track it because of our resources. We were able to track it we found out that there were DVDs of it being pressed in the Philippines. And at the time I was working with someone in Homeland Security, and we were talking about it, and I handed the case over to them, and I got a call a few weeks later saying, you just opened up and exposed a factory that was printing DVDs that was selling them on the street that's connected to the Taliban. That was funding Taliban, terrorism. Another one was in the Ukraine. There was a hitman's bodyguard had come out, and the Russian mafia came in pretty much with guns. They cleared out the whole entire theater. They told everybody to go home. They brought in a tripod.
They were polite, right? They were very polite, though.
Yeah, very, very polite. You're very polite when you're pointing a gun at someone. They set up a tripod in the middle of the theater, had guards at both ends of the thing, and filmed the movie and went and sold it, because then they used the movie to advertise their illegal casinos, their prostitution rings, and all that stuff. And that's what people are buying into when you're stealing. That's where it leads. That's the road it leads down.
So,
and I know that personally.
Yeah. So Kerry talked about the 20,000 links that were up, and then Kerry, I really want you to talk about it a little bit more. But to put it in context, our industry sends Google and YouTube, just Google and YouTube, not even Facebook, sends them 900 million takedown notices a year. Now that doesn't mean, so the way the law is that it was written in 1998, it's called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And it says that if the platform isn't liable until you, the legitimate copyright owner, send them a notice, then they have to take it down. The intent of the law was that they would work with us to make sure that they stayed down. But the interpretation of the law in the courts was that they didn't have to until you sent another one. So if Kerry sends a takedown notice for one of his pieces of score, and the next day it goes up again after they've taken it down, but it's from a different IP or URL, I never get that part right, Kerry, he has to send another one. So those 900 million takedown notices to Google and YouTube are not because there's 900 million pieces of content. It's because Google and YouTube go ahead. Oh, sorry. I remember Brian McNellis saying, he's Lakeshore Music. He said, if you get 150,000 takedown notices for an Adele song, aren't you pretty sure that like Joe Smith doesn't own it and like the record label does? But according to the law, they don't have to. So Kerry, you should talk a little bit about that process.
So Content ID is what I use on YouTube. It's a very hard thing to get access to, but if you happen to be a musician or a composer that's in the audience here and you want to explore that, I'd recommend AdRev. You've probably heard of AdRev, or if you're watching YouTube, you've at least seen like AdRev somewhere in there. It's a third-party system that sits on top of Content ID and accesses the same system just through their gateway. And I can, through my dashboard, as it finds uses of my music, take down infringing uses. The thing I found with the 120,000-ish that I'm up to now is that these aren't cute little kitten videos. These are car commercials. In fact, yeah, car commercials, luxury hotels, bottled water, churches, religious organizations, right-wing orgs. My latest problem the past 2 months, it's truly whack-a-mole, is a QAnon call to arms video that used one of my like kind of epic cues in it. And it got put onto this QAnon Q drops site. So all these people take it and it keeps being re-uploaded. And I keep, taking them down. It's gotten a couple million views now. And just when I think it's done, it pops up again on somebody's channel. But now it's popping up like in Germany and in Russia with subtitles for like German. It's insane.
So does your technology allow you to directly take down the offending use as opposed to
Yes, but it's not his technology. It's YouTube. It's a YouTube technology that they have developed because they were getting, it was actually developed after the YouTube Viacom case in the early 2000s. Was it SpongeBob? Yeah, I think it was SpongeBob. And even though they won that case, Google won that case because it was determined legally, like within the letter of the law, which is back to the, not to the intent, but to what the courts decided. So they created content protection tools. There's over, yesterday in this, the Copyright Office hearing that we attended yesterday, Rasty Turk from PEX, who has another company like AdRevs, said there's over 100,000 copyright owners. And that, I think that's probably low. And YouTube has granted access to the content protection tools to only 9,000 of them. There's no transparent way that they tell you why you are. They just, they deign to give it to you. So Kerry can fight it. Whereas another colleague of ours, Mitchell Block, emailed me again today. He owns a film library that he uses for educational purposes, including Ken Burns. He goes, they won't take down his titles.
Well, for
they took his content protection tool away from him.
Our Millennium, my company, who has a library of over 400 movies, we were denied Content ID in like 17 minutes of like sending it in, and they wrote back to us and denied us, which means nobody reviewed anything. I had to go to Washington to beg them in front of Senator, who was it?
It was Blackburn. We asked for as a roundtable with Google and YouTube to explain to us why they wouldn't give it to anybody who was a legitimate copyright owner. So Jonathan came, Maria Schneider, who was a music composer, came, Mitchell Block came. Kerry, I read his anonymous statement because he didn't want to be dinged for saying, having it taken away from him. He since has spoken at a Senate hearing for us. They don't want to give it to anybody. And literally in that meeting, in front of Marsha Blackburn, the senator, and 8 chiefs of staff from Adam Schiff to, Senator Coons, you name it, the lawyer from Google looked at me and said, we don't have to give you anything. And I thought, that's the truth. But he's sitting in a Senate hearing room with 8 chiefs of staff. He should at least try to pretend that he gives a shit. But the arrogance—
better to know the devil you're up against in a way.
But what's fascinating is that the money that they spend in DC in their attempt to weaken copyright laws is more money than our entire industry spends together to lobby in DC. Because they don't want copyright to be around. And there's a question from Greg Fontana saying, how do these numbers compete with the Silicon Valley argument that repealing the DMCA would stifle innovation? Jonathan mentioned this. I testified on a House Judiciary Committee up in Santa Clara, and the General Counsel for Andreessen Horowitz, which is it's a venture capital for innovators for Silicon Valley tech kids. He said, my problem with copyright is that it stifles creativity and innovation. And I'm sitting in a room, it's like a hearing with 20 people, all lawyers, all general counsels from these tech firms. And I literally, like, you have to turn your name card on its side to be recognized. And Chairman Goodlatte said, Ruth, would you like to say something? And I was like, yeah, I would like to say something. These Silicon Valley people talk in slogans. Don't break the internet, freedom of speech violations. It's like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything regarding copyright? I said, and when you say that copyright stifles creativity and innovation, copyright is the only thing that stands between our creative communities and the breadline. The only way that you as a creator can make money is that you can copyright your creation and you solely determine how you want it to be distributed. If you want to give it away for free, that's great. But if you want to be compensated fairly for your work, copyright is the only thing you have.
Kerry, do you want to talk a little bit more about, you know, you sort of fell down this rabbit hole of trying to, you know, protect yourself by taking down your music. And I think that, you know, it must have been particularly upsetting to find your music affiliated with, you know, QAnon. I mean, it's a cult, and I don't want to presume anyone's politics, but I assume you're not a cultist. So, like, you know, do you have any leverage or any repercussions that you can exact beyond just the takedown? Do you have any rights that you can pursue beyond that?
You know what, it's tricky because of the DMCA, and there's kind of like an if-then process that all this stuff has to play out by. The short answer is that you can, if you can afford it, hire a litigator to take somebody to court. I have like a lawyer and a litigator, and they'll settle the bigger claims for me. I can actually settle a lot of the smaller ones myself. The thing that gives me, the only recourse well, let's say this. There's great protection in that world because people are anonymous. And so if somebody wants to actually refute your takedown for whatever reason, they click this button that says counter notify. And the YouTube gives you two options that you can pick when you counter notify to say this takedown is wrong. I have a license, or this is fair use under US copyright law. And that's the bad one. It's become so misunderstood and so weaponized. But so when someone counter notifies, I'm kind of stuck unless I actually want to pursue it legally. Now, if they don't, because doing a counter notification involves them putting their actual name and physical address in there as part of the legal requirements, then what I do have as leverage is that I have a strike against their YouTube account. And for commercial accounts or monetized accounts or MCNs, which are multi-channel networks, like they basically represent other channels, as you apply strikes against someone's YouTube account, it slowly chokes the account. The first strike, I think, cuts off live streaming ability, and by the third strike, it will terminate their channel. It's not really, if you're a big channel with a lot of monetization, a lot of followers, 3 strikes isn't going to terminate your channel, but it sort of triggers like a plan B where you get a week's grace period to try and fix it. The recourses that are available are not really available to independent people like me because I can't afford to file federal lawsuits against all of the fake counter notifications.
A federal lawsuit can cost on average close to $300,000.
Yeah, it's not possible. But again, somebody like me who has these, I'm a guy. I'm not a company, I'm just a guy. And my story gets lost because there aren't more people using the technology, I think, or more independent people using it. When you're the only person in the room screaming, it's very easy to get drowned out by the other side's slogans, or by this monolithic big bad record labels that are abusing everything. It's those big bad record labels. And a story like mine gets lost in that because there's just not enough oxygen in the room for a middle-class independent composer who writes pretty music,
I also want to go back to Greg's statement question in the chat because it's actually really interesting. So they don't like copyright unless it's their algorithms. Ask them to share their algorithms with you. Okay? Oh, they can't share those because those are truly innovative.
And I think if someone actually did steal Google's algorithm, the weight of 1 million attorneys would land on that person.
Yeah.
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 It's,
And
What
and
about
so
you, Jonathan? Have you sought any recourse? Have you tried to track down any of the pirates
Oh
and
yeah.
sue,
Oh, I
or-
track them down. Oh my God, I fight on a daily basis. We're in the middle of probably 50,000 lawsuits.
50,000?
Yeah.
50,000? That's
Across the
impossible.
world. No, but they're smaller ones.
Okay.
Because what we do is we don't go after for money. It's not about us collecting money. It's about education. So we'll come after somebody, and all we'll do is we'll make them, and we try to find serial downloaders, people that've got like 1,000 titles on a hard drive or something,
Yeah.
a bunch of our stuff. And after they've also been warned by their ISP, we'll subpoena the ISP, we'll get the information of the subscriber, and then we'll go after them, but we'll just put them in front of a judge and make them promise that they're never going to pirate again, because now they got punished for it. Because the truth is, in this country, if you don't actually get punished for something, for running a stop sign,
Yeah.
nothing's going to happen.
I've always felt that if they would if they would treat it like a traffic violation, less people would pirate. Because like when I glided through a stop sign, it was like $250. You think long and hard before you don't hit those brakes hard when you hit that
Yeah,
stop
no,
sign.
we do, and we go, and it's been very successful. I have so many apology notices of people saying, I didn't know the things of piracy. It wasn't my internet. It wasn't my stuff. So we go after them, and they say, we'll never do it again. But we do go after, because people say, really put your money where your mouth is, or saying if you're really going to do this. And so we took it upon ourselves to try to protect our copyright.
So the job you say may be your own, okay? And this ridiculous notion of free, which Gregory also talks about, the free culture. What you can do as individuals is talk to a few people, one by one by one. I know it seems like it's boiling the ocean, but that's how you start. Okay, you have to start one by one by one, and you have to make sure that people understand. The other thing, which is actually more frightening and may stop people, Tom Galvin, who's a colleague who runs this company, an organization called the Digital Citizens Alliance, did a study that over 30% of every person that pirates has malware. Because the other way pirates make money, they either make them, you have a subscription on a pirate site, or it's ad supported, or they make a deal with a malware ransom company, and every identity that the malware company steals, the pirate site gets a piece. So not so much fun when you find that your identity has been stolen and ransomed and you're screwed. Okay,
let's dig into that a little, because I remember when I did that event with you at UCLA, there was I forget the gentleman's name, but the guy who talked about a specific device, and he said, sorry,
Cody Box.
Yeah, Cody Box, right? And he said, here you can buy an Apple TV for $299, or you can buy the Cody Box for $79, and you think, oh, bargain, why wouldn't I get the Cody Box? It does the same thing. But what you don't know is that it's in your computer. He said it could even be reading the information in your digital.
Yeah, it can read.
It can get into everything in your home.
Yeah, it can read right into your Wi-Fi and into your computer. So it looks like an Apple TV. It's a little box. The box on its own is legal. They come from China. They're like $50. The Kodi, K-O-D-I, open source software is also legal. It was another way to put a whole bunch of stuff on a box so that you could use it on your television. But they can be jailbroken, and they can be uploaded with apps that are pirate apps. And those boxes also have malware on them. When Gail Ann Hurd, who's a producer of The Walking Dead, she and I were talking to Chairman Jerry Nadler, who's a New York congressman, and we were talking about this issue of piracy. And she said, it's not only about our community who are losing money, like to be able to make more product and better product. It's about consumer protection at this point. And I know that young kids think, screw it, it's a 30% chance, who cares? Well, when it happens to them, it's going to be bad. And I think in the UK, they just did I know they did. They just did a recent report that in the UK, it's up to 50% of the piracy apps have malware on them. It's serious.
I want to just also invite our audience to put in questions if you have any. I know a couple have come in through the chat, but I want to encourage other people if they would like to ask specific things. So you can either do it through the Q&A function, which I'll monitor, or the chat, either one. So, I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, apart from the, you know, I mean, I know you guys are on the front lines and you're trying to educate both, you know, within the community as well as the legislative community. Well, before we get where do we go, let me ask this. How has COVID impacted piracy, and has it been
Badly?
Badly?
That's the work that's the work we've been doing in DC since March. The House Judiciary Committee has been asking about how bad it's been. There were 40 to 50% upticks from March to April. China was a little bit sooner. What we tracked all the numbers. Listen, people are at home.
Yeah.
A lot of people have lost their jobs. Okay, what do they have to do? Like, I get it, and I don't want to seem callous. All right, I mean, it's a hard time. People are dying all over the world, but piracy, in fact, has jumped, and it's a problem. But nobody wants to go after the individual users. The legislation that we're working on now is right now, because the law was written in the 80s, downloading is a felony, but streaming is a misdemeanor. Because in 1986, nobody even knew what streaming was. Now, 80% of all content consumption, legal or illegal, 80% is done on streaming. 80% of all piracy is from streaming. So what we're trying to do, and we've come up with language that the other side, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world are okay with, is to go after the criminal enterprises, not to go after grandmothers and teenagers and consumers. Because you know, often that happens. Some are serial piracy people, like Jonathan says, but many end up at a pirate site and they don't have a clue because they look beautiful. So what we want to do is go after the criminal enterprises that we talked about and shut them down. And now the Department of Justice doesn't want to go after them because even if they shut them down, it's a misdemeanor, and if they don't get them on money laundering, they can't shut them down. So that's the legislation we're working on.
So where do you think, I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, obviously, you know, technology has created a lot of opportunity, right? Both in, you know, how things are created and how they can be distributed. As you pointed out before, Kerry, you know, there was an advantage to a composer who could suddenly be discovered, you know, without the barrier, right? I mean, and I can definitely see and argue both sides, you know, for the emerging artists to be able to self-distribute, you know, is a glorious thing. Just that the emerging artist doesn't have the same economic infrastructure behind their work.
That's the most beautiful. Listen, that's one of the beautiful things about something like YouTube. I actually think that there's parts of YouTube that are great, which is that you have a platform, you can create your own content, you can get it out there. You don't need to go and find an agent and manage it. You can actually make your own little short film. You can compose your own music and put out there. But use your own shit. Don't use someone else's shit. It's very simple. If you're going to be an artist and a creator, there's no art in stealing someone else's stuff and monetizing it.
You know what? Jonathan just nailed something that I encounter constantly being a Content ID user, which is that the people that have the hardest time with following copyright rules are the YouTube creators who are just rehashing other people's stuff. Do something original.
Yeah.
Don't.
And by the way, when you do, even though the way the copyright laws work is that once you create it, it is yours, and it is already you know, you own the copyright.
Register that
copy. The Copyright Office.
Yeah.
Register it.
Yeah.
Have a paper trail.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost that much money.
It's like $50 for an album of music.
Yeah. Make sure that you do that. And by the way, if you then choose to give your music or your, you know, creation away, that's fine. But I know Richard Schenkman is an independent filmmaker, and he was being stolen from so much that he finally decided to put his movie up on the online and say at the beginning, pay what you will, but please pay me. You know what the pirate sites did? They took his movie, took off his message, and monetized it for themselves. Because I had said to him, that's a bad idea. It's not going to work. And it didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know what the next steps are. I know that, you know, you, Nina.
Well, eat felony streaming.
Well, we want to get felony streaming, but for these kids, join Creative Future. It's free. CreativeFuture.org/join us. Every 2 weeks, you'll get an email from me. Don't delete it. Read a little bit of it so that you're informed, so that you know what's going on. And tell people, you know, it's not dissimilar to voting. When I was in my 20s, I said, I don't give a shit about voting. It doesn't matter. And it's a little bit like that. It's like, oh, I'm going to pirate. I'm just one person. But behind the one person, like in stealing, there's tens of millions of other people saying the same thing. And in voting, it's not dissimilar. Yes, your vote counts. And yes, your piracy transaction counts, but in a bad way.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I just want to ask one more time if anyone wants to put anything in the chat or the Q&A. And if there's not,
we clearly answered every single
everything,
question.
because you guys are also articulate and brilliant and beautiful.
Or maybe they all fell asleep or left. How do I know?
Yeah.
Hard to know. But are there any, let me ask you this. Let me take a pivot back away from piracy for a minute. Let me just ask you for some, you know, general career advice. Let me ask each of you, what is the best piece of career advice you've ever gotten, and what is the worst piece of career advice you've ever gotten?
Carrie, take it away.
God.
Oh my.
Okay, that's a hard one. Because the thing is, I'm not there yet. I'm still aspiring to be where I want to be, but I'm at least making a living. And so I think part of, you have to set reasonable goals. I thought I'd be an Oscar winner for Best Film Score by 25. That didn't happen. But you know what? At 39, I was a full-time composer. And my goal has never been to be famous. My goal is to make this my living. And
I'm going to do a plug for Kerry. His music is beautiful. I downloaded it on iTunes.
Pirated it.
I did not pirate it. I downloaded it because
I
I said to him, if I put it on my iTunes, you'll get money, right? And he said, yeah. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. So those are the things that you can do.
I think that you have to, sorry.
Sorry, we have a question from Gerard, because he asked, what do we do with a generation that has no concept of privacy, let alone piracy, which I think is interesting. How do we indoctrinate young people to take this more seriously when they don't have any concerns about putting their whole life?
What do you think?
How do we get ahead of that?
I think that you have to change the law and they need to be punished. That's it. To be honest, if someone steals something, they need to be punished for it. Right now, there are no repercussions whatsoever. It's the same thing as, like I said before, if there's a traffic violation that people keep doing and doing and doing, what's going to happen? The city's going to pass a law and they're going to make that traffic violation, you get a ticket for it, or you get your license taken away, or whatever it is. Problem is,
in Germany, they have fines, and piracy is pretty much diminished. I think it's 750 euros.
And in Turkey, it's a fatwa. So if you do piracy, you get your hand chopped off.
That's not true. Is that true?
They issued a fatwa for piracy a few years ago. It's crazy.
I'm not going to Turkey anytime.
That's a little extreme, by the way. I don't agree with that.
If absent a question, I want to jump back to the career advice thing.
Yeah.
There's a couple really practical things, especially for musicians, because with I was on iTunes kind of before any other indies were, so it made it look like I was already as legitimate as the people around me, or as accomplished as the people around me. And I guess now the equivalent is getting onto a Spotify playlist or something. I think it's really important to never stop. It's kind of like going to the gym. Like I used to go to the gym and then I stopped, and like it's been a long time since I've been in a gym. You have to keep doing it. You have to be kind. You gotta be especially if you're working in like film and TV where you're the composer. I think that editors are a really great personality type to model yourself after, because they're really chill. They go with the flow. They're happy to be there. Nobody wants to work with an asshole. You got to be excited about what you're doing. You have to be as in love with the project as your director is. The other thing I would say, and this is so practical, is when you are a professional musician, composer, songwriter, whatever, you're a business. And it helps to do things like to lay out an accounts receivable calendar for yourself, knowing that I can expect, you know, my ASCAP or BMI royalties to come on these dates, so I have this money coming in, and to set realistic targets for yourself. That, you know what, I'm going to write one piece of music each week, and at the end of 4 weeks, I will have 4 pieces of music that I could give to a music library that will begin to generate income for me, that will generate performance royalties for me. And it's basically like the way that Susie Orman talks about dealing with your financial life, and like, yeah, you spend $5 on a coffee each day, but times 7 days a week, that's $35 you've spent. Times 52 weeks, that's a lot of money you spent that you don't even know where it's going. And I apply a lot of that thinking to my own work, in that as long as you set a goal, you have some sense of what you're actually accomplishing. And at the end of the year, you can sit down and tally it up and realize what you did and have a body of work. I think that that's, I'm all about measurable successes versus always tilting at, like, when I was 12, I wanted an Oscar. I wanted to be John Williams scoring Star Wars, not realizing there's a super long journey between 12 and whenever that other thing happens. But there's a lot to be accomplished in there, and there's a lot of joy to be had and success. And it can be a short film. I think you always have to be practicing, but be kind. Because you know what? A bad reputation, especially on a below the line talent, a bad reputation will kill your career in a heartbeat. All it takes is one editor, even on a tiny little one editor, to say like, he's kind of a dick, or he's really arrogant or something. You will never work again.
I've often said that my key philosophy to career success is just don't be an asshole. Like that's like just you know, behave well. Like just start there. You know. I have another question. I will go back to career advice, but I have another question. So
we didn't answer the other person's question about privacy versus piracy.
Oh, and all right. I'm sorry.
I'm going to be really grim about that.
Yeah.
How many? Brett's going to cringe. He's listening in. Brett works with me. He has an Alexa. He knows better than anybody that thing, even when it's turned off, listens to you. We have a generation of kids that go, and older people too, because Brett's not young, that say, I'm not doing anything, that I don't care if anyone's listening because I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, that's the beginning of the end of your civil liberties. And we're getting there. So to those people that are concerned about your civil liberties, turn off your location services on your phones. Don't have an Android. Don't use Google. You know, I mean, and you're right, privacy is a far bigger issue, but privacy, that horse left the barn 20 years ago. Because we have multiple generations of people that say, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't care if they're listening to me. That's not the point. The point is that they shouldn't be listening to you. Google has an ad for their Nest, their thermostat, that says, don't you want to know what your kids are doing? And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want you to fucking know what my kids are doing. I don't even have any kids, by the way. But the point is that every one of these companies, what's the vacuum Roomba? That is a GPS in it that sends it back to the factory that maps the inside of your house. And when that was found out, their stock like tripled.
Why? Wow, how does that make sense?
Because just like Google Maps has the outside of your house, now Roomba has the inside of your house. They sell that data.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's sort of insane. So anyway, we can't answer your question because the answer is we're doomed.
So what can young creators do? This is a new question, but this is what can young creatives, what are the most important actions they can take to protect their materials or their intellectual properties? How can they best protect themselves?
Copyright, right, Kerry?
Copyright.
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is register the copyright, and the very simple practical reason why is because if you pursue somebody who's used your music, the first thing they're going to say is, prove it. It's yours, prove it. There's no copyright. I don't see your name in the copyright.gov database. And the truth is, like, it's your copyright the minute it's created, but your very first interaction with that entity is, it's like 12-year-old, it's like dealing with 12-year-olds. Prove it. I dare you, prove it. This is the story of the last 7 years of my life, is prove it. And you know what? I send them back a scan of my copyright registration, a link to the work in the copyright database, and I CC my litigator on it, and it gets some answers.
Mm-hmm.
But the other practical thing, music-wise, because I'm not familiar with photography and film and how that kind of content protection works, AdRev, AdRev, AdRev. It is free.
That's our good friend Noah Becker, and he's fantastic.
Yeah, AdRev is Content ID. It's just a different way to enter it, like a different doorway. It's free, as long as you monetize most of what you find. And they do allow you to do takedowns on some things, as long as I think your default policy is to monetize it. Those are the most practical and immediate things you can do to protect your work. And here's the thing that the point that I kind of wanted to make, is that when I got Content ID and I opened up that dashboard and saw like the thousands of videos, I'm not a famous person. I too thought there's not going to be anything there. I searched my name. I only found 20 videos. The point is that with music, if someone's using your music in a video on YouTube, they're not going to credit you. If you're underscore, they're not going to put, in part because they don't even know what the title is, because they got the music from a torrent where the title has been changed to 12345.mp3. So they don't even know it's yours. I encourage you, I'm telling you, it's better the devil you know. Get AdRev, throw your stuff in there, fingerprint it, see what happens.
Also, by the way, don't share your stuff on links that aren't secure and that don't expire.
What about a platform like Vimeo, where a lot of young filmmakers upload
I
their
feel like
material?
here's the problem. We had a conversation with them a couple of years ago because I said you should have dedicated passwords for individuals. So Nina, if I want to send out my movie, you have a different password, then Kerry has a different password, then Jonathan has a different password. And it's good for 30 days and then it expires and you can't get back. But you can't give your link to Jonathan of my movie because the password's only good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish more companies would do something like that to protect your work.
Music-wise, Vimeo is a huge problem. They don't get as much oxygen as YouTube does, in part because YouTube allows you to monetize stuff, and Vimeo is a pro platform. You'd be amazing at how many pros don't license their music, or will actually go, like I have some things available through a music licensing site that I work with that are only available through them, and the only way to get a clean, unwatermarked recording is to actually license it from them, and then you get the clean recording. And I was finding that music that's not publicly available on pro Vimeo things. And we're talking like major hotel chains, car companies, things like that. And it turns out that the pro videographer went to the music licensing site, ripped the audio from the preview player, which was clean, and then used that audio without licensing it. Because they figured they'd probably get away with it. And they would have, except that someone then uploaded that to YouTube where it triggered my Content ID. And I was like, wait, I never licensed to this car brand that I'm not allowed to say what the name is. And so I went to Vimeo and looked it up and found the commercial on there as part of the reel of the producer or the videographer. And that's how I nailed that one. It really is a lot
So
of the
is
time.
there a way for, this is another question from the audience, is there a way for a YouTuber to properly use your music? Can they request permission to pay you?
Or pay you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I work for basic like YouTuber licensing stuff. There's a ton of music services out there now. Unfortunately, a lot of them have become kind of predatory towards the artist side. They don't really pay anything. There's a place called MusicBed that represents my stuff for sort of small scale licensing, credit card, shopping cart type transaction. It's really simple. But I also get people just like tweeting me or emailing me to say, hey, can I use this? And I tend to just send them to the licensing site because it's cheap and easy. But yeah, I get requests for
What's it
bigger things all
called?
the time.
Carrie again, music,
MusicBed.
B-E-D?
Bed.
MusicBed, yeah. Like a boutique licensing agency. They're great. I think that whoever you're approaching, basically these days you can't say, oh, I couldn't find you. I get that a lot when I nail people. Oh, I couldn't find you. I'm like, I have a verified Twitter account, 2 Facebook pages, an Instagram page, and I just happen to have a kerrymuzzey.com. And if you type my name, no matter how you misspell my name, if you type it into the Google box,
By the way,
you're going to at least get my Wikipedia page and kerrymuzzey.com. Like,
I really have to
can't
say
not
that you
find
can
me.
you could type in CARRIIMUZAY and it would come up with your name. The one brilliant thing about Google search is you can be a really bad speller and it will know what you want.
Yeah, it'll find me. So I would encourage you, like, you know, sometimes people, says from Anita. Anita, sometimes people will charge a fee. It depends on what it is. Just ask, work it out. And what I would say is that if there's streaming has kind of decimated the music middle class. If there's a musical artist you like, drop the $7.99 on their album instead of just listening on the free Spotify. Like, it makes a huge difference. Yeah, it does matter. Great question though.
Yeah. So we have
what did she say? I've never received a copy of any of my aired TVA episodes, but I've found the music at all on Daily Motion or YouTube. Would you come after us?
Yes.
Yes.
100%.
Wait, you mean if you use my music without permission and I found you on Daily Motion or YouTube, would I pursue that? Yeah, actually, I've been really disappointed to find a lot of the infringements I've found have been from fellow independent creators, like filmmakers, videographers. It's not just big corporations. It's like the little guys. Oh my God, wedding videographers. It's horrible. They're charging $5,000 to somebody to shoot a film at their wedding, and the whole thing's underscored with my music, and I didn't get anything for it. You know, I do realize that there has to be some honor among creatives.
Yeah.
We are all part of the same.
When I find if I find a new artist that I like on YouTube, if I find, like, there's an artist named Benjamin Todd. That's one of the recent ones that I found. He's a folk singer, and I saw one of his music videos that he made. The minute I found him and I loved his music, I went to iTunes and saw that it was available and bought the whole album. And the whole album was like $7.99 or whatever it was. But I did it. I don't like all of a sudden, but I did it because this is a creative. He's creating. I'm a creative. I create, and we have to support each other.
And also, by the way, when I hear young people, by the way, I sound like when I was a child, I walked 7 miles to school in the snow. But when I hear people say they can't afford $3.99 or $7.99, it's like bullshit. Your coffee, latte, schmutzy, Starbucks shit cost $8 or $5. I don't drink coffee, so I don't even know. But don't say that you can't afford it, because it just perpetuates this everything that we create should be free. It doesn't matter. It does.
And if you want to earn a living in this business, you have to recognize that what you do has a value and people should pay you for that. And I mean, I talk about this not even on the copyright side, but to a lot of people who are starting out. You know, you have to know your own value. We all maybe take a shot and do a little work for free or for less than we thought. But at a certain point, you have to say, I'm worth it. I am what I bring to is worth being paid for.
It is part of the fabric of our society and has been in civilization for centuries. When I was pre-med at Tufts and I dropped out after 6 weeks of the chemistry course where I was like, fuck, I'm never gonna make it. And I changed to literature and a minor in dance. And my father, who was at Harvard Medical School, said, why don't you take a basket weaving course too? All right. At the end of the day, that man talked about my career and was over every movie set and every premiere that I ever went to, because you know what? It was far more interesting than the work he did, although I will say his work was important. But don't discredit what we do. We have been brought up, we all are born creative, and it's drummed out of us to become lawyers, accountants, doctors, computer programmers, although that is a sort of a creative skill. But don't dismiss or devalue what we do. You know, what was in the Renaissance, everybody had to have a patron because they couldn't make a living. And all those major artists died broke.
This is probably a great moment to say that talking about this stuff can feel super dystopian, and it can feel like real Debbie Downer. And I got to say, I had so many people, because I'm from small town Illinois. I went to college in Illinois. I had a lot of people saying, you know, what are you're gonna be a composer? What? Like, but you know what? I did it. Because my attitude was kind of like, fuck you all. Like, don't tell me but I'm just a little bit stubborn that way. So I would tell you, don't treat this as people trying to tell you not to pursue what you want to pursue. It's more like, just know what you're getting yourself into. And music-wise, be aware that this whole thing that's happening, like on YouTube, is something you should be aware of. And maybe your first step is to get ad rev so that you can take a look and at least know it. Because it used to be when people said, you know, you got to learn the business behind that, what they just meant was, don't sign away your life and know where the money comes from. Now it also means know where your stuff is. Know the tech.
We just got a question, which I wish that, Gregory, you had been listening to the Copyright Office hearing yesterday on standard technical measures, because it was all about fair use. His question is, what happens when someone trots out the old fair use chestnut? And you know, Jonathan, I know you have something to say about this too.
I use a nutcracker.
That's right. But here's the thing. Yesterday, our friend Noah Becker, who owns AdRev, said to the woman on the other side, which is Electronic Frontier Foundation, which does great privacy work, but on the piracy side, they literally, she was like, fair use is abused by your side all the time. And Noah literally said, lady, if you want to sign an NDA, you can come over to my office. 95% of the fair use claims that we get at AdRevs are bullshit. He said, your users don't understand what fair use is. That shut her right up.
So why don't you talk a little bit about fair use and what it actually is and how it gets misused?
Well, so here's the thing. It's wildly complicated. All right. And so maybe Kerry can speak to it better than I can, because I'm not a lawyer, neither is Kerry, but Kerry deals with this all the time.
Yeah, there's actually a very easy way to kind of bullet point it. We have to start from the standpoint that YouTube, who thinks that licensing is too complicated a concept for their uploaders to grasp, is allowing them to claim fair use on something. If the concept of asking permission to use music in your video is too hard to grasp, I can't imagine how someone could grasp the concept of fair use. I used to work with IP attorneys in TV, and part of the thing that we did was actual legitimate fair use, like for documentaries and stuff.
Right.
Fair use is a defense in court. That's what fair use is. It means that you're doing some commentary or criticism about a copyrighted thing, and you're allowed to use the smallest amount necessary to make your point, and the smallest amount that you're addressing or talking about that is relevant to the point you're making. It comes from basically the idea of criticism and analysis. The problem is with a place like YouTube, if you want to get rid of someone's strike or takedown, like if I apply a takedown to someone, the two options that YouTube gives them in a drop-down menu is, I have a license, or this is fair use under US copyright law. And that fair use thing has become so ubiquitous that it's come to mean something different than it actually means. it's been diluted and it's been weaponized. And unfortunately, the concept has been co-opted by like the EFFs and the public knowledges of the world, saying it's limiting speech. And you know what? If you take my music and put it under your video because it makes it epic, because it makes you cry, because it moves the clip along, that's not a fair use. There's no commentary on my music. There's no criticism of it. You're using it creatively.
That's theft.
Yeah, it's a creative.
And as Jonathan, you say this all the time. Take a clip of my movie. That's great. But the wholesale use of my movie?
Yeah.
That's theft.
That's theft. I don't mind if people take stuff of my films all the time and make like little mashups or make a video. And I think that's actually kind of cool when people do that, and I'm flattered. But yeah, the whole movie, it's not fair.
And it's different from movies and music, right? Because music, a piece of music can elevate and speak as like the under fabric of the entire piece. And it could be 10 seconds or 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's
a
why
movie, let them mash up and use 5 minutes of your movie.
Yeah.
That's okay, but you got another hour and a half of it that they shouldn't be feeling.
Yeah.
Where music is concerned, I think most IP attorneys will agree that it's very hard to fair use music unless you're specifically talking about the music. Like here's this trick that Bach used, and Andrew Lloyd Webber does the same thing in this Phantom of the Opera. Like, if you're actually talking about it. In the case of somebody like me who's an underscore composer where I write instrumental music that is meant to go underneath something for a creative purpose, it's kind of hard to fair use unless you're showing the clip and saying, notice where the changes in the music are happening, and that's what's triggering you. If I saw something like that, I'd be like, you know what, that's legit fair use. I'm not going to touch it. Mm-hmm. I've never, ever seen a legitimate fair use of my music, ever.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Noah said yesterday, which is 95%. I can't remember the percentage of or literally these people have no idea what fair use is. And he said, and the other 5% or 3%, because he said maybe 2% might be right. The other 3, he goes, are just crazy.
But if you Google how to get out of if you just Google how to get out of a YouTube strike, you get all these forum posts about here's the language you use, just say it's fair use, and here's the button that you push, and they have to sue you after that point, and they won't, so just do it.
I just wanted to say, because this does all sound dark and grim, like how Kerry was saying, being in this business and being in a creative field, for me personally, is the only thing I ever wanted to do.
That's not true. You want to run for political office too? I'm going to run your campaign.
Yeah, but DC is Hollywood for ugly people. Same thing.
Okay, go ahead. I had to get that in because I know that your mother would be happy.
No, but what I would say is all I ever known, I would play pretend, I would act out movies, that's what I would do. I constantly lived in a fantasy world. I didn't understand anything else. I wasn't good at anything else. And to be able to do that, to be able to do it is a privilege. It's amazing. And I want people to create more, because it's more fun that way. When people are creating awesome things and being able to share it with the world. So it is incredible. The only thing is that we just have to work together, because we all should be working together.
To have each other's backs.
And have each other's backs and just protect our stuff so we can continue to create. And we can keep the floor open for other people to create, So it's a hell of a thing to know that, when you make a film, my latest movie, The Outpost, I have outpourings of emails from veterans saying, you're helping me with my PTSD. Thank you I thought the riots were happening. I thought one thing about the country, and I woke up, I saw your movie, I think another thing about the country. Now to see that these things are happening with our stuff, it's amazing.
When I ran the indie studios, I always just thought, whatever. And then students would come up to me after I spoke and would say, Shine, touched me, or You Can Count on Me was amazing, or Virgin Suicides, brought me to tears. And then you start to realize that what we do, even if, because I'm not the creative, I create the publicity campaign and the marketing campaign and figure out distribution, but what we do is important. It really affects thousands, if not millions of people.
Millions of people.
But also,
No?
but the type of films that affect the people are normally those smaller independent films with a message.
Right.
And those are the ones that are really being affected by this, because you'll always have Spider-Man 18 and Marvel 29. You'll always have it. But the Moonlights of the world, the Blackbirds of the world, the Outposts of the world, the Muds of the world, and the Lincoln Lawyer, like all of these movies are going to be so affected that they're going to die out. It's very, very difficult. It's becoming very difficult.
And by the way, they are. You know, you see all these independent distribution companies going out of business. It's not. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah, to tell you, I was affected by movies growing up. Hook, Newsies, Forrest Gump, those three, on repeat, moved me so much.
I just got off the phone with Wendy Feinerman, literally just before this.
Oh, really?
It was Forrest Gump, yeah.
Well, those were the things that made me want to get into this business. And so to be able to put out content that hopefully makes somebody else want to do it, it's a great feeling. So I hope that after all this grim stuff we were saying, I still hope you guys pursue.
All right, yeah, because
my career thing. I just wanted to say what my career thing is. My career.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
we have to wrap up. I want your last final nuggets of career advice.
Like Kerry said, be kind, which is so true. Don't ever stop, and don't settle. I personally believe, and I've eaten a lot of shit. People tell me I'm crazy for wanting to do this business. You can have your cake and eat it too. I do not believe for 1 second that there is such thing as settling. That is on you. And if you want, and you just don't stop. Like Kerry said, do not stop. Keep going. Even when people think your stuff is bad, I can't tell you, there was a time where I thought everything I was doing was bad. Everything I was creating, everything I was writing, everything I was just bad. And I was like, then I realized, oh, people just didn't understand some stuff. And now I'm making a genre movie based in the Hasidic community next month that I wrote. I sold it around the world. It's amazing. And so just keep going. Because when you keep going, you're going to just be chipping away. And I'm nowhere near where I want to be. I got lucky this year, even with COVID, that I might have an Oscar-nominated film. I might have all of this stuff, but I'm nowhere near where I want to be. And I want to merge technology and the movies. I want to merge it all together. I just don't want the tech business to do a drive-by shooting on my house. Well, but anyway, that's my
okay, Ruthie, a final word from you, piece of advice to wrap us up.
Be true to yourself, be true to your vision, but also having read thousands of scripts and seen thousands of movies, like I think I used to screen 1,000 movies a year minimum. Okay, not everyone's interested in you staring at your navel. All right, so okay, I don't want to see that movie. There's times when I think I want my time back.
That's the need for the executive. That's the need for the executive to come in and.
It's like, stop staring at your navel and tell a universal story. And it could be a personal story.
Right. Well, what I always say is find the universal truth that you're talking about and the personal lens to tell it through. That's the writing mantra, my writing mantra. So
see, Nina, I told you this was going to go longer than an hour.
Well, we scheduled for an hour and a half, and here we are. But anyway, I want to thank you all so much. This has been really informative, and even though I am involved with CreativeFuture, I learned some stuff as well. I want to thank you very much, all of you, for your time and generosity in putting this together and coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
And we will talk again. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
By the way, anybody who has any questions, you feel free to give them my email address. Actually, you know what? It's ruth.vitale@creativefuture.com.
Okay.
You need me? Scream.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.